He slid the page across the embalming table, the little flag tab pointing at the signature line. And he said it the way he said everything that mattered. Softly, like he was doing me a favor. Sign here. Sweetheart, it is just loan paperwork. Family doesn't need lawyers. 11 years. I had run that funeral home. The books, the bodies, the families who called at 3 a.m, because the worst thing they could imagine had finally happened. I scheduled the priests. I ordered the caskets. I balanced the accounts down to the penny. I held strangers' hands while they decided what their mother would wear. Into the ground. And in 11 years, I never once made the payroll list. Because in my family, the men signed the front of the checks, and everybody else signed the back. Here is what my father did not know. That morning, my name was already on $140,000 of debt I had personally guaranteed at 19. The loan that pulled that business back from the auctioneer with 3 weeks to spare. And 8 years after this morning, my name would show up on a second piece of paper. A transfer that sold my half of Halloran and Sons for $1, a document I never signed, a signature that was not mine. I left that building that year with a duffel bag and $400. Today I am the forensic accountant. Other people's attorneys call when a signature looks wrong. I get paid by the hour to prove that the hand on the page is not the hand that owned the name. Last winter, for the first time in my life, I examined the signature they faked in mine, and I made them buy my half back. At the real price. Hab to the dollar. My name is Nora Halloran. I am 36 years old. If you have ever been the one your family counted on for everything and counted as nothing, the one who did the work that kept the lights on and somehow never made it onto the list of people who get thanked, then stay with me, because this is the story of how the cheapest pen in that building became the most expensive mistake those men ever made. Before I take you to the day it ended, I have to take you back to a brick funeral home on a corner in the Mahoning Valley, in Youngstown, Ohio, back to the gold leaf lettering on the front window that I cleaned with vinegar every Saturday of my childhood. The lettering read, in tall serif capitals, Halloran and Sons. My father had it painted in 1974. The year he opened, he had 2 sons by then. He would not have a daughter for another 16 years. He never changed the window. He used to say the window was already correct. If this is already landing somewhere tender in you, take 1 second and tap the like. And subscribe if you haven't. It tells the algorithm to keep these stories in front of the people who need them. The ones the family wrote out of the will and out of the story. And do me a small thing. Drop your city in the comments and the time it is where you are right now. I genuinely like knowing who is out there in the dark. With me tonight, I am Nora. Let me tell you who I was before I was anybody. My mother died when I was 9. A stroke in the kitchen on a Tuesday in February of 1999. My father buried her himself in our own chapel with our own flowers, and he did it beautifully. Because he was the best in the valley at making grief look orderly. He arranged her hands. He chose the lighting. People said it was the most peaceful viewing they had ever attended. I stood by the guest book in a dress that was too thin for February and watched 200 people sign their names with my father's fountain pen. The heavy black Parker he kept in his breast pocket. The one that wrote in blue-black ink, the one only he was allowed to use. That pen is going to matter later. Remember it. After she died, somebody had to do what she had done. My brothers were teenagers. Marcus was 15 and already learning to drive the hearse. Connor was 13 and soft and stayed in his room. So, the somebody was me. By the time I was 11, I was answering the business line. By the time I was 14, I was keeping the books, because Esther, the bookkeeper, looked at the way I lined up numbers one afternoon and said, quietly, "You are one of us." That was 2004. I did not stop keeping those books for 11 years. Here is the first thing you should understand about how this worked. And I want to be specific, because vague is how people get away with it. I was not helping out. I was operating the business. I did the accounts payable and receivable. I did the payroll for the 4 employees we had, which meant I cut everyone a check except myself. I did the price sheets and the casket orders and the insurance assignment forms and the death certificates that have to be filed with the county within 72 hours. Or the whole thing stops. When a family came in at their worst hour, I was the one who sat with them. My father shook hands. My brothers carried the heavy things. I ran the company. And every payday, my father handed Marcus and Connor an envelope, and he handed me nothing. And if I ever looked at the envelopes a beat too long, he would smile and say the sentence. He said it so many times, it stopped being words and became a kind of weather in that house. In this family, the men sign the front of the checks. Nora, everybody else signs the back. He meant it as a law of nature. He meant it the way you'd explain gravity to a child who kept asking why she fell. Stay with me here, because this next part is where the trap was built. And most people who heard this story later assumed I was foolish. I want you to see that I wasn't. In the autumn of 2008, the funeral home almost died. The recession hit the valley like a second winter. People still died, but the families couldn't pay. And the pre-need trust we'd borrowed against came up short in an audit. And the bank called the line of credit. We were 3 weeks from the building, going to auction. I was 19. I had been doing the books for 5 years, and I knew, better than my father did, exactly how close to the edge we were standing. The bank would refinance, but they wanted a personal guarantee from a principal. With clean credit, my father's credit was wrecked. Marcus had 2 repossessions. Connor had a default on a student loan. The only person in the family whose credit was spotless was the 19-year-old, who had never been allowed to have anything of her own. So the lawyer my father hired, a man named Dale Forsyth, an old golf friend. This matters later, too. Dale structured it so that I became a 50% member of the new limited liability company. On paper, I owned half of Halloran and Sons, and I personally guaranteed the new loan. $140,000. I signed it with Dale's cheap office ballpoint in a conference room that smelled like burnt coffee. And my father stood by the window and looked at the parking lot and did not say thank you. Here is the part that I need you to hold. I signed that guarantee with a clear hand on a real date in front of a real banker who watched me do it. My genuine signature went into that bank's file and stayed there, 19 years old. Blue ballpoint, a little nervous, but mine. Every loop and every lift, mine. 8 years later, that signature, sitting forgotten in a bank's archive, would be the thing that hanged them. But I am getting ahead. That detail matters. Tuck it away. So now, I owned half the company. Did anything change? I want you to guess. If you've ever owned something on paper that you did not own in your life. You already know the answer. Nothing changed. I still cut the checks. I wasn't on. My father still handed out the envelopes. I was now, legally, a 50% owner of a business that paid me in groceries. And the room I grew up in, I was the half owner who couldn't take a Saturday. The one person who saw it was Esther. Esther Okafor had kept the books at Halloran and Sons since before I was born. She was 61 when she trained me. A Nigerian woman who had come to Youngstown in the 70s and never once in her life rounded a number. She had a green cloth-bound ledger, the old kind with the red corners, and she kept the company's official books in it in a hand. So neat, it looked printed. That was the book my father saw. What my father did not see was the second green ledger. Esther kept it in her own bag. It looked exactly like the company one. And in it, starting the year I turned 14, she wrote down my hours. Not the company's hours. Mine. The Saturday mornings. The 2 a.m. removals. The holidays. She wrote them down in that same printed hand, week after week, year after year. And at the bottom of each year she wrote a number. The number a fair employer would have owed me. And she underlined it twice. I did not know she was doing this. For a long time, I found out the year I turned 20 when I told her, crying for the only time I let anyone see, that I felt like I was disappearing. She didn't hug me. Esther was not a hugger. She reached into her bag and put the second green ledger on the desk between us and opened it and let me read it. 11 years of me, written down by the one person who refused to let it go uncounted. And she said, the thing I have repeated to myself in 100 different rooms since. She said, child, I have buried a lot of men in this town who believed the books would die with them. The books never die. You keep the true one, and you wait. Every account comes due. Every account comes due. Hold that line. It is going to come back at a polished table in front of people in good suits. And when it does, you'll feel it land. Now I have to tell you about the day I left. And I want to do it slowly, because this is the day the cold open paid for. And you deserve the whole thing. It was March of 2015. I was 25. My father had been diagnosed in January with the thing that would eventually kill him, and the family had started, very quietly, to get the paperwork in order. Marcus said that phrase a lot that winter, getting the paperwork in order. He had married a woman named Bridget the year before, pretty, ambitious, freshly minted as a notary public. So proud of her embossing seal that she notarized the grocery list as a joke at Thanksgiving. Remember Bridget's seal. Remember that she got it in 2013, and that a notary commission in Ohio runs for 5 years. And do the arithmetic later, because somebody forgot to. One Tuesday that March, Marcus asked me to come to the funeral home after hours. To sign some things for Dad. I came. The chapel lights were off. The only light was over the embalming table in the back, where Marcus had laid out a stack of paper, and where my father was sitting in his wheelchair, with his oxygen, watching. There were maybe a dozen documents. Marcus walked me through them. Fast. The way you rush somebody who trusts you. A release of my personal guarantee on the loan, which I was glad to sign, because being on the hook for $140,000 had cost me sleep for 6 years. A few updated vendor agreements. A consent to my father's medical directives. Real things. I signed them. And then he slid one more across the steel table. Flag tab pointing at the line, and said the sentence you heard at the start. Sign here, sweetheart. It is just loan paperwork. Family doesn't need lawyers. But I read it. I always read it. That was the one thing 11 years of books had burned into me. I read it, and it was not loan paperwork. It was an assignment of membership interest. It transferred my 50% of Halloran and Sons to Marcus and Connor. The consideration line read, $1 and other good and valuable consideration. I put the pen down. I asked what the other good and valuable consideration was. Marcus said, staying family. My father, from his chair, said the sentence one last time. Softly, with the oxygen hissing under it, the men signed the front of the checks. Nora, it is how it has always been. I said, no. I said it once. Quietly, I did not yell. I have never yelled at any of them. Not once, not to this day. I said, I built this. I am not giving it away for $1. And I picked up my coat, and I drove to the apartment over Esther's garage where I'd been staying. And I packed a duffel bag, and in the morning I left Youngstown with $400. And I did not look back at the gold leaf window I had cleaned with vinegar every Saturday of my life. Here is what I believed when I drove out of that town. I believed I had refused to sign, and that they had therefore simply cut me out. That the will would leave me nothing. That the family would close around the Sons the way it always had, and that I had lost. I believed I had walked away from my 50%. I grieved it like that. For 10 years, I told myself a story in which I had given it up. I was wrong about what happened in that room. After I left, and the document that proves I was wrong was sitting in a county recorder's office the whole time, waiting for somebody who reads signatures for a living to finally come and read it. But that was 10 years away. First, I had to become her. If you've ever driven out of the only town you've ever known with everything you owned in one bag, you know the specific silence of that highway. I am not going to spend an hour on the rebuild, because you already know I survived. I am here, talking to you, so let me give you the years fast, the way they actually felt, which was fast. I waited tables in Columbus and took 2 community college accounting classes at night. I was good. Of course, I was good. I'd been doing real ledgers since I was 14, while other kids were doing worksheets. A professor named Dr. Aziz pulled me aside after a forensic accounting unit and said, "You see fraud before you see the numbers. That is rare. Don't waste it." I transferred. I finished my degree in 2.5 years on grants and night shifts. I sat for the certified public accountant exam and passed all 4 parts on the first sitting, which almost nobody does, and which I only mention because for the first time in my life, a number on a page was about me and in my favor. Then, I went after the credential that would become my whole life. Certified fraud examiner. I studied the way you study when the subject is the exact shape of the thing that was done to you, and you don't even know it yet. I got hired by a forensic firm in Chicago that did litigation support. The people who get called when a business partnership detonates. And somebody's money is missing, and it turned out I had a specialty already living in my hands. Signatures, forged endorsements, falsified ownership documents, closely held family companies where one person did all the work and another person ended up owning all the paper. I was, it turned out, an expert in the precise crime that had been committed against me years before I knew it had been committed. By 2024, I was a name I was the forensic accountant a federal prosecutor brought in on a regional case that made the national news. A charity in the Midwest, whose director had been siphoning donations through a web of vendor companies he'd quietly created himself. I was the one who matched his hand to the signatures on the shell. Company filings, he swore, he'd never seen. I testified for 2 days. The clip of me on the stand explaining, very calmly, how a forger's own muscle memory betrays him. How a person can disguise a signature, but cannot stop their genuine hand from doing the thing it has always done. That clip went around. A morning show booked me. They put a caption under my face. It read, Nora Halloran, forensic accountant, the expert who reads the lie. In the ink. That caption aired on a Wednesday in October of 2024 in a brick funeral home on a corner in the Mayoning Valley. 3 people watched it. I know they watched it because of what came next. But before I tell you what came next, I need to tell you that the same October, 2 other things happened. 8 days apart, and I learned about both of them too late. The first, Esther Okafor, died. She was 86. She had retired from the funeral home years before, but had kept living 3 streets over. And she had kept in a hall closet both green ledgers, the company's and mine. Her granddaughter, a woman named Amara, I had never met, found my name and a Chicago address tucked inside the cover of the second ledger. In Esther's printed hand, the note said, If she ever needs it, it is hers. It was always hers. Amara mailed me the ledger in a padded envelope. It arrived the same week as the second thing. The second thing was my father's obituary. He had died on the 19th of October. 4 days after Esther, Marcus wrote the obituary, the way the family wrote everyone's. It ran in the Vindicator. I read it standing at my kitchen counter in Chicago. In the same week, I learned the woman, who had actually counted my hours, was gone. I read it the way I read everything, carefully. It listed my father's accomplishments. It listed the charities. It listed, by name, his beloved sons, Marcus and Connor, who carry on the family business he built. There was no daughter in it. There was no me. The family that wrote obituaries for a living. The people I had taught to file a death certificate inside 72 hours. Had buried their own father and erased the daughter, who ran the place out of the record of his life. In the lobby of the funeral home, I would later learn, there was now a brass plaque for the 50th anniversary. It read, Founded by Gerard Halloran, carried forward by Halloran and Sons. Cleaned every Saturday, I would bet, by somebody who isn't on it either. I did not go to the funeral. The funeral director's daughter, who had sat with hundreds of strangers while they buried their own fathers, did not sit at her own father's. I want to be honest with you about that, because the easy version of this story has me sweeping in for the casket. I didn't. I read the obituary, and I put it in a folder, and I opened the green ledger Esther had sent, and I read the last entry she ever made in it, dated the month I left, 11 years earlier, with the final number underlined twice, and underneath it, in pencil, in a hand grown shaky with age, she had added one line years later. She left. She was right to. The account is still open. And that is the only time in this entire story that I cried, alone, at my own kitchen table, in a city none of them had ever visited, with a dead woman's handwriting in front of me. I did not cry at the embalming table. I did not cry at the obituary. I did not cry at the thing I am about to tell you about, the thing in the good suits at the polished table. I cried once for Esther, who counted me when no one else would, and then I closed the ledger and I went back to work. If you have ever found out too late that the one person who saw you clearly is gone, comment the word unpaid below. Not for me, for them, for the Esthers. I read every one of those comments, and I want to know how many of us were quietly counted by somebody we didn't get to thank. No, the reckoning. And I need you to watch how it was built, because there is not one accident in it, not one lucky glitch. Everything that happened because of a document they made and a procedure I followed exactly. In the spring of 2025, a company called Meridian Memorial Group decided to buy Halloran and Sons. Meridian is a consolidator. They buy up independent family funeral homes across the Midwest. Keep the old name on the window because grieving people trust the old name. And run them on a corporate back end. It is a real industry. The valley was full of homes like Halloran's third generation, asset-rich, cash-tired, and Marcus, now sitting on a building and a brand, and a 50-year reputation, was ready to sell and retire to a lake. The agreed price was $2 million. $200,000. Stay with me. Because here is where 11 years of bookkeeping and one dead woman's ledger and a 19-year-old's nervous signature all arrive at the same place at the same time. When a company that size buys a business, they don't take your word for anything. They do due diligence. They hire a forensic firm to audit the books and, critically, to verify the chain of ownership. To make sure the people selling the thing are the people who actually own the thing. A clean ownership history is what the title insurer requires before it will insure the sale. No clean chain, no insurance. No insurance, no closing. Meridian's counsel hired a forensic firm to run that ownership audit. They hired mine. Now, I want to be very precise with you about what I did next. Because this is the part where a lazier story cheats. And I will not cheat, because the whole point of my life is that I don't cheat the procedure. The procedure is the weapon. The file came into our firm's intake system with the business name on the cover sheet, Halloran and Sons, LLC, Youngstown, Ohio. I saw it during the standard conflict of interest check that every examiner runs before touching a new matter. The instant I saw the name, I did the only thing a certified fraud examiner is permitted to do. I filed a conflict of interest disclosure in writing. That same morning, I disclosed that the subject company was my family's business, that I held or had held an ownership interest, and that I could not work the matter. I recused myself completely. I handed it to a colleague, a senior examiner named Priya, who had no connection to any of it, and I did not touch the file again. Not one page, my page, not one keystroke. I want that on the record, the way Esther kept the record, because my hands being clean is the entire reason their hands got caught. I told you I had walked away from my 50%. I told you I believed for 10 years that I had refused to sign, and they had simply cut me out. Priya is the one who found out what really happened. She found it the way anyone would, doing an honest title search. Because the chain of ownership for Halloran and Sons did not show me refusing to sign. It showed me signing. There it was, recorded with the county, an assignment of membership, interest, dated March of 2015, transferring my 50% to Marcus and Connor for $1 and other good and valuable consideration, with my signature on it, notarized. I had said no, in that room. And somewhere after I drove away, somebody made the document say yes. Priya flagged it because that is what an honest examiner does. And because it had two problems that a trained eye sees before the coffee gets cold. The first problem was the signature. Now, anybody can scrawl a name, but Priya had something most forgers never think about. She had an exemplar, a verified, genuine, dated specimen of my real signature, sitting in a bank's file from 2009, the personal guarantee, the $140,000 I signed for at 19. In blue ballpoint, nervous, but mine, that document was real, and it was archived, and it gave the firm an unimpeachable example of how my hand actually moves. Hold the next part, because it is the thing I built my whole career on. A genuine signature is a single fluent motion. The hand has done it 10,000 times. It doesn't think, it flows. A forged signature is a drawing. The forger is copying a shape. So the hand stops and starts. Under magnification, you can see the pen pauses where a copyist lifts to check the original. You can see the tremor in a line that should be smooth. You can see ink pooling at the little hesitations. My real 2009 signature flowed. The 2015 signature on the transfer was drawn. It had the pauses. It had the pooling. It had the careful, fatal slowness of a hand copying a hand. It was a good forgery. It was not a real one. The difference is everything, and it is exactly the difference I get paid to find. There was a smaller tell, too. The kind that makes me almost fond. Every genuine Halloran document, for 40 years, had been signed with my father's heavy black Parker, in blue-black iron-based ink. The man did weddings and funerals with that pen. The forged transfer was signed in cheap blue ballpoint. They wrote my fake signature with the wrong pen. The men who lived and died by signing the front of the checks couldn't even forge with the right ink. The second problem was the notary. The transfer carried a notarial acknowledgement. The embossed seal that says a notary watched me sign and confirmed I was me. The seal belonged to Bridget, Marcus's wife. So proud of that stamp, she notarized the grocery list. Bridget got her commission in 2013, an Ohio Notary Commission. In those years, ran 5 years. Do that arithmetic. 2013 to 2018. The transfer is dated March of 2015, so the seal should have been valid, and for a long time I assumed it was. And I assumed that detail was a dead end. But Priya pulled the notary's record from the Ohio Secretary of State, which is public, which anyone can search in 90 seconds. And Bridget's commission had been administratively revoked in November of 2014, 4 months before the date on the transfer, for a filing failure. She had moved counties and never refiled. A paperwork lapse, the most boring thing in the world. On the day she pressed her proud little seal onto the document that stole my company. Bridget Halloran was not a notary. The acknowledgement was void. The whole instrument rested on a stamp from a woman who had no authority to stamp. Here is what those two facts mean together. In plain English, because I promised you I would never hide the verdict in vocabulary. A forged signature does not make a transfer weak. It makes it void. Not void if someone complains. Void from the beginning, as if it had never existed at all. You cannot transfer something with a signature the owner never made, which means the 2015 transfer never moved anything. which means that for 10 years, while I told myself I had given up my 50%, while I waited tables and passed exams and rebuilt my whole self around the belief that I had lost, I had owned half of Halloran and Sons the entire time. They couldn't sell the company because half of it was mine and is mine and had never stopped being mine. Sit with that for a second. The way I had to. Stay with me. Because this is where it turns. Meridian's title insurer would not insure a sale with a forged link in the chain. The deal could not close. And the only person on the planet who could clear that defect, by ratifying the corrected ownership, or by being bought out at the real price, was the daughter they had written out of the obituary. Then they will have to come to you. Esther used to say about the truth. They came. Marcus called my office. He did not get me. He got my assistant. He left a message, and my assistant transcribed it, and I have kept the transcript the way I keep everything now. It said, "Nora, it is your brother. There has been a misunderstanding with some old paperwork on the home, and the lawyers are making a thing of it. And we need you to sign a quick release, so the sale can go through. We'd love to see you. It has been too long. We're family. A quick release. So, the sale can go through. Sign here." Sweetheart, I did not call back. I had my attorney call theirs. I did not say anything to Marcus. Directly, I let the procedure do the talking. Because the procedure was finally, after a lifetime, on my side. We met at the closing table, a conference room in a title company's office in downtown Youngstown, 11 miles, and 11 years from the embalming table. Long table, good chairs, a window full of gray valley sky, Meridian's lawyers. On one side, the title insurer's representative, Dale Forsyth, old golf friend Dale, the lawyer who'd structured the loan in 2008, and I now understood, had structured a great many things. Sitting next to Marcus, looking like a man who had not slept, Connor at the far end, not meeting anyone's eyes. Bridget was not there. Her name was on every page of the void transfer, but she, herself, stayed home. And me, with my own attorney, and one thing on the table, in front of me, not a folder full of theatrics, one green cloth-bound ledger, with red corners. Marcus tried to start it warm. He stood up, arms a little open, and said, "Nora, my God. Look at you. We have so much to talk about. Sit. We'll get this paperwork done. And then the four of us should really." I did not sit toward him. I stayed in my chair. And I did the thing Esther taught me without ever telling me she was teaching me. I informed. I did not argue. Arguing is for people who think the other side gets a vote. I was not there to win a fight. I was there to read the account. I said, "I am going to say 4 things. You can have your lawyers check. Every one of them, they already have." The room got still. Connor finally looked up. I said, 1. I own 50% of Halloran and Sons. I have owned it since 2009, and I have never stopped owning it. The transfer, dated March of 2015, is void, not contestable. Void. My signature on it is a forgery. I know it is a forgery because I am the person it pretends to be, and because I do this for a living. and because a verified specimen of my real signature has sat in a bank's file since the year I saved this company from the auction block. The two do not match. Your own title insurer's examiner reached that conclusion independently, before she knew my first name was the same as the one on the page. Marcus said my name once. Low. The way our father used to, I said. 2. The notarial seal on that transfer belonged to Bridget. Her commission was revoked in November of 2014. The transfer is dated March of 2015. On the day she sealed it, she had no authority to seal anything. That is a matter of public record at the Secretary of State, and I would gently suggest she stop notarizing things, because that question is now in front of people whose job is to ask it. Dale Forsyth put his face in his hand. Just for a second. Then, he took it away and went back to being a lawyer. I said, 3. I am not here to press charges. I want you to hear that clearly, because I can see Marcus doing the math on a felony, and I want him to be able to breathe enough to listen. I am not interested in prison. I am interested in arithmetic. This company is being sold for $2,200,000. My half is $1,100,000. In 2015, you bought that half from me for $1. The difference between what you paid me and what it is worth is $1,099,999. The sale closes today at the real number, and my half comes to me. By wire. Before anyone leaves this room. Then you can sell your half to Meridian and go to your lake. Nobody spoke. The Meridian lawyers were already nodding, because for them this was just a clean fix to a title defect. Pay the rightful owner. Close the deal. To them, it was Tuesday. To me, it was the whole of my life arriving at last, on a single line of a spreadsheet. And then I said the fourth thing, and I picked up the green ledger when I said it, and I did not raise my voice. And this is the part the people who were in that room still talk about. I said, 4. There is a woman who is not here, and she is the reason I am. Her name was Esther Okafor. She kept the real books in this company for 40 years, and she kept a second set in this ledger that none of you ever saw. For 11 years, she wrote down my hours, because she knew the day would come when somebody would say, I had never been here. By her count, I worked an average of 51 hours a week, 52 weeks a year, for 11 years. 51 times 52 is 2,652 hours a year, times 11 years is 29,172 hours. At the average minimum wage of those years, $7.10. The floor, the absolute least a stranger off the street would have been owed. That is $207,121.20. I am not going to ask you for it. The ledger isn't a bill. I am telling you the number out loud, in this room, with these witnesses, because it was never said out loud while she was alive to hear it, and she earned the saying of it more than I did. She kept the true book. And every account comes due. I set the ledger down. I did not slide it across the table. I just set it down, flat, in front of me, where it stayed. Marcus said, Nora, we were trying to keep it in the family. I said one thing back to him. And it was the only thing I said in the whole meeting that was for me, and not for the record. I said, I was the family. You signed me out of it. So now I sign the front of the checks, and I picked up my own pen, a plain steel pen, my own, the one I sign reports with, and I signed the ratification that cleared the title. And the wire went out, and $100,000 landed in an account that had my name on it and nobody else's. And I stood up and I picked up Esther's ledger, and I left before the Meridian lawyers had finished collecting their copies. My father did not call my name because my father was dead. Connor walked me to the elevator. He didn't say anything until the doors opened. Then he said, very quietly, I knew. 2 words, I knew. I got in the elevator. I did not answer. The doors closed. I drove home to Chicago that night with the ledger on the passenger seat where Esther used to imagine it sitting. I suppose all those years she was writing in it. Now I have to tell you what they did after, because this is the part where the anger you've been carrying for me finally gets to set itself down. The villain in this story was never a cartoon. It was a worldview. The men signed the front of the checks, built into paperwork, by ordinary, smiling people. And ordinary, smiling people do not apologize when the paperwork stops protecting them. They escalate. In the first week, I had 19 voicemails. By the end of the month, more than 40. I did not listen to most of them. I listened to a few. The way you press on a bruise to confirm it is still there. Marcus's 3 days in, after the money had cleared, and the felony math had settled into him, was not an apology. It was an invoice. He said, after everything this family did for you, we raised you. We fed you, and this is what you do. You bleed us in front of strangers. Mom would be ashamed. I saved that one. I did not call back. Silence is a complete sentence. Bridget called once. Her commission revocation, the boring paperwork lapse, was now a referral. Because a void notarization on a forged document is not a thing the Secretary of State can pretend it didn't see once it is in front of them. She did not call to apologize. She called to tell me I had ruined her. I let it go to voicemail. I forwarded it, unanswered, to a folder on my computer labeled simply theirs. That folder is still there. I have not opened it since. I may not. The title insurer issued a written finding. Because they have to paper everything. It states, in the flat language of an institution that does not care about anyone's feelings, that the March 2015 assignment of membership interest was void at execution due to a forged grantor signature and an invalid notarial act, and that lawful ownership of the 50% interest had at all times remained with Nora Halloran. I have a copy. It is 1 page. It is the most beautiful thing anyone has ever written about me. And it was written by an insurance company that thinks I am a parcel number. They didn't mean it as vindication. It is the realest vindication I will ever hold. The institution that exists to be skeptical of everyone looked at the whole thing and found, in writing, that I was right, that the difficult one, the help, the daughter who signs the back of the checks, was telling the truth the whole time. And they were not. Marcus and Connor's sale to Meridian closed. Eventually, on their half, the gold leaf window came down during the renovation. A worker chiseled the old serif capitals off the glass to make room for Meridian's standardized sign. And here is the one thing I asked for. That wasn't a number. I asked Connor, through the lawyers, the only channel I used, whether I could have a piece of the old lettering. A few weeks later, a small flat box arrived at my apartment. Inside, wrapped in tissue, was a single curl of gold leaf and glass, the lowercase letter from the word and. Just the and. From Halloran and Sons. The part of the sign that joined the family name to the Sons, and left no room for a daughter. I keep it on the shelf in my office, next to Esther's ledger, the smallest, most patient thing in the room. There was one more box. This one I didn't ask for. It came from Connor, with no lawyer in between. 6 weeks after the closing, inside was our father's fountain pen, the heavy, black Parker, the one only the men were allowed to use. The one that signed the register of the dead and every front of the check for 50 years. There was a note, 4 lines, in Connor's bad handwriting. It said, "He'd hate that I am sending you this. That is most of why I am. I should have stood up at that table. In 2015, I didn't. I am not asking you to forgive me. I just couldn't watch it go to a stranger." I held that pen for a long time. The man who'd wielded it like a scepter was in the ground in a chapel I'd run. Under flowers I'd have arranged better. I did not cry. I had already used my one cry on Esther, where it belonged, but I held it for a long time. I want to be careful with the ending, because the cheap version of this story has me getting the family back. And I am not going to lie to you to make it feel warm. I did not get them back. I do not want them back. Marcus and I have not spoken. We will not. My father is dead, and the last thing he said to me was the sentence he'd been saying my whole life. That door is closed, and I closed it, and I am at peace with the closing. But the story isn't empty. There is one thread that survived, and it found me on its own. About a month after the closing, I got an email from an address I didn't know. It was from a 16-year-old girl named Junie, Marcus's daughter, my niece, who I had never met because I'd been written out of the family before she was old enough to ask why there were no pictures of an aunt. She had seen me on that morning show, the clip with the caption, and she'd done the kind of digging teenagers do. And she'd put it together that the forensic accountant who reads the lie in the ink had the same last name as the funeral home, and the same last name as her, and that nobody in her house would say why. Her email was 4 sentences. The last one said, "Nobody will tell me the real story, and I think you are the only person in this family who keeps the real anything. Can I just know you?" I wrote back. I told her she could know me on her own terms, in her own time, with no obligation to anyone in that house. I told her if she ever wanted to learn how to read a ledger, the real one, the one you keep for yourself, I would teach her. She wrote back, one word, yes. That is the thread. That is the salvaged human thing. A 16-year-old who, somewhere down the line of all that paperwork, came out wanting to keep the real anything. I'll take it. It is enough. If you've made it this far with me, do one last thing. Comment the year you finally walked out. The year you stopped signing the back of the checks in your own life. Just the year. You don't have to explain it. You don't have to win it in the comments. You just have to live long enough to write it down. I'll read every single one. I always do now. I learned that from a woman who wrote things down for 11 years, so that one day they couldn't be denied. Here is where I'll leave you. I run my own firm now. Small, just me and Priya, and 2 analysts. The name on the glass door reads, in plain capitals, no serif, no gold leaf, just frosted letters a worker, put up on a Tuesday afternoon. Halloran Forensic, not and Sons. Not and anything, just Halloran and the work I do. which is finding the lie in the ink for people who were told, the way I was told, that the paper was settled and they had no standing to question it. On the day they installed the door, I signed the firm's first official document, the engagement letter for our first client, and I signed it with my father's heavy black Parker, the pen that was only ever for the men. In blue-black iron ink, I signed it on the front. I sign everything on the front now. That is the whole reversal, and it is smaller and truer than any reunion. Not that I beat them, but that the cheapest stack of paper they ever made, the $1 transfer they thought would erase me, turned out to be the document that proved, in a court-grade hand, that I had been there the whole time. The most dishonest paper in that building became the thing that gave me back my name. Esther was right. The books never die. You keep the true one, and you wait. Every account comes due. The gold and sits on my shelf, useless and beautiful, joining nothing to nothing. Esther's green ledger sits beside it, closed now, its account finally settled, and on the door, in plain frosted letters with no room for suns, is the name they spent a lifetime trying to keep off the glass. I am Nora Halloran. That is the name on the door. That is the name on the report. When a signature is wrong, that is the name I am going to teach my niece to write. In the front, where it counts. Thank you for sitting with me tonight.